Welcome everyone to Lukus Podcast. This is class number 2 in the 10th discourse in the book B'Shoshek Dimu 5672. This is the 10th discourse called Vaydaber Moshe al Roshei Hamatos, and this is going to be class number 2, and it's also going to be class number 2 in chapter 37. I traveled for about over a week, so that's why you haven't been updated on a new class. And now I'm back, and hopefully we'll have a few weeks where we'll be able to do a bunch of classes and stay consistent. Here we are. So in this discourse, we're continuing the theme of how in an Orpnimi, in the internal light, when the lights vesselize, when they enter into the realm of vessels, which is in the world of Atzilus, that's when there is a whole system of higher and lower. And the higher the spheros means the higher the spherot, the higher the attributes are a greater quality, and the lower the spheros is lesser quality because there's less light. Remember we discussed in last class, more vessel, less light, less vessel, more light, and the whole compatibility between the lights and the vessels. And again, more and less doesn't only mean more in literal, but it also means more when the vessel feels itself more. It's a more thicker, denser vessel or a more finer vessel and all of that. But what we learned, the lights, before they go into vessels, in a sense, all the lights are the same. The lights, because even though there's a very differentiation of the lights, where you can't just say that the vessels are creating the Chachma, Chesed, Gevura, all the Sfirot, there's already a semblance, a trace of differentiation already in the lights. But at least on that level, all the lights are just as potent and just as powerful. It's only when the lights go into vessel in an orderly fashion, they line up, the front of the line and the back of the line, Chachma being the first and Malchus being the end, and the way it passes through, it diminishes. So he continues in this chapter explaining that the idea over here of being higher and lower, more, is related to the idea of being more and less, or kiruv and richuk. The closer something is, closer to the source, it's receiving more light. That's what we learned, like in a when you have a big fire burning. If you're close to the fire, you have more light, and if you go far away from the fire, from the blaze, even though the light is going farther away, it's getting less. So the same is also the Or Ein Sof is closer and shining towards the vessel of Chachma from a close-by place, if you can say that. And in that sense, meaning and therefore more light is flowing and shining and illuminating in the vessel of Chachma, versus Bina is already standing farther away from the Or Ein Sof, and therefore the light is shining obviously the Or Ein Sof is everywhere, but in terms of the way Bina is receiving, it's like a vessel that's standing at a distance from the light. And and so on. So now we're continuing that idea, and that's what we find, that in Chachma, in the first flash in a human being, for instance, the first flash of an epiphany of an idea, there's a great illumination, and then once you start chewing on it and you start explaining it with all kinds of explanations and all kinds of breaking it down, although you're digesting it and grasping it better, the person himself is getting a better sinking their teeth into it, but the brightness of the concept is dimming because the light is not so strong in Bina, because Bina has more vessels, and therefore the light is at a greater distance. But then we learned in last class, when you get to the emotions, it's much lower. Why? In Eitz Chaim, it says like this: then in Chachma, the Or Ein Sof is shining bikiruv makom, as if Chachma would be very close to the source. Bina is shining berichuk makom; it's the same light but shining at a distance. But then when it comes to there's a Eranpin, the 6 emotions. How is the Or Ein Sof affecting the 6 emotions? It's coming derech chalon. It's coming through a window. It's like light, an outside light shining through a window. And just like you can't compare, it's the last idea we were learning, the light that's outside, the brightness of a light that's outside when you are outside, a nice sunny day, and compared to the light coming through a window. Even though the window is a nice big window, it's still, the light is already, since it's coming and it's being blocked by the walls, and it's only shining and it's entering through a window, there's already a narrow only a narrow inlet for the light. When I say narrow, everything is relative, but compared to the openness of an open space, it's considered already far inferior and much, much less light. So much so that he brings it lahalacha, that there's a halachic ramification to this. The idea of light coming through a window, even if there's no shades, even if there's no blinds or whatever it is, or no tinted window, just a pure glass, or even if it's not even a glass, there's just an opening in the wall, and where light is like the windows used to be, just a plain window, a plain open space. Yet, the light is considered much less. That in the laws of Bedikas Chametz, that outside you don't have to use a candle, because the light you can examine or inspect or search for the chametz, and you get enough light. But indoors, you can't use daylight. You must wait till it's night and then use a candle, because only the candle, you can bring the light up and close and find the crumbs and the little pieces which you would not see if the light is coming through the window, unless it's an achsadra. Achsadra is like a patio that's outside, an open space. So there the light is coming in as is. Okay, so that was the last thing we learned. And this is all to show to us that in the world of emotions, we consider the light that's entering in, the original light that's entering in, as if it's entering into a closed space, even if there's an opening. So to understand that a little better, what does that mean? Let's continue. This is where we left off in last class. Okay, Kamoiken Yuvan, and the same will be understood. This is the middle of chapter 37, like smack in the middle. The Bizah, Zah stands for Ze'er Anpin. In the Ze'er Anpin, which is the Kabbalistic terminology for the small face, literally translated as small face, it means the 6 emotions of the divine. When it shines, when it's coming only through a window, it's a diminished light. And now he's going to translate that. What does that mean? So he's going to give us another way of understanding that. He used physical light coming through a window, but now he's going to show it to us in a more abstract example. And that is when we examine the light of intelligence that enters into our emotions. You see, intelligence has to illuminate into an emotion, because every emotion has some structure that builds the emotion. That's the cause of the emotion. It's usually a certain realization. How do you form an opinion? And as a result, in order to have an emotion, you have to have an opinion about something. Because emotions are how you feel about things, how we get excited about things, people, objects, entities, anything that's outside of us. We relate to them and we attach ourselves to them through a certain emotion. Certain things we cringe by them, we get scared of them, we clamp shut from them, they intimidate us, they make us nervous. Certain things we get very excited and we love them, and we want to be closer to them. Other things we run away from them. So all these things, now what is it? Because we first have to get a certain opinion about it. And what forges our opinion? We have to get to know it. It's a good thing, it's a bad thing, right? The more you study something, the more sometimes, like now, I know there's a little bit of a feeling of discomfort in the Jewish world regarding certain candidates or certain politicians that came into power. So if you ignore the news, which is better for you, what is it going to help? So if you ignore the news and you don't pay attention and you don't read about it, then fine. But if all day long you're sitting on YouTube or you're looking on whatever, on Instagram or whatever it is, and you're reading on every story and you're listening to every speech this particular politician has given or gives, and you happen to live in the city where he became the mayor, it can really cause you to cringe and to get really, really nervous and get really, really scared, to get really panic or whatever. So, but if you're not paying attention, then the emotions, you're only hearing a little bits and pieces from the outside. If anything, there's a very light emotion, not an intense emotion. So emotions are informed by intellect. And I'm just giving an example of something that's pretty strong right now, but single thing in the world, there is always information of the mind that leads and becomes the soul, so to speak, the empowerment of the emotion. However, you cannot compare the intellect as it is felt in the brain to which is called the light, and compared to the intelligence, to the idea, as it makes its way down into the heart, into the emotion. And when it gets to the emotion, it's already severely diminished. Now, he's first going to give an example. He's assuming he's going to give an example from an actual emotion, but first he's going to give an example from the way we see it in, where you can see clearly in intelligence, an idea coming to a emotional, formulating itself as an emotion, but more of an emotion of the mind. What do we mean by that? It would mean like any type of a verdict. Okay, a judge that hands down a verdict. The verdict, every verdict is based on certain knowledge of the information of whatever was presented in court. So if it comes in front of a judge, there is a confused situation. Two people are arguing. This guy says you owe me the money. This guy says I don't owe you the money. It's a big fight between the two, and we don't know the facts. There's just a big mishmash. So one of the things that have to happen is that the judge has to engage in sometimes hours and hours of testimony. This one brings witnesses, and this one brings witnesses, and the judge gets to hear, or the jury, or whoever it is over there, gets to hear the entire story, and they have a ton of information. And over there, there's a whole lot of, till you get a lot of clarity of what's the real story, who's telling the truth and who's lying. Okay, and then finally, the judge, those are the jury, those are the people that are sitting in court. But then there's the final day where the news reporters come in and they announce to everybody outside, and they say, this person was found guilty or is found innocent, or so and so. This company had a lawsuit and they have to pay now, $5 million. That's the verdict. And most people that they're getting the verdict, they might be interested in the verdict. They get the final thing, but they're not really reading the 500 or 5,000 pages that the court clerk had, or whatever they call it, the writer, the one who records in the court, that writes up all based on what the judge came to this conclusion, or the jury came to this conclusion. All this evidence was presented. So those that were sitting in court and they were hearing the back and forth, they have the entire richness of all of it. This one only. Now, when you're reading the final verdict, the judge might put in 1 or 2 lines or 3 lines, or maybe a paragraph, or maybe 3 paragraphs of what is the deciding evidence, or what was the conclusion of clarifications of reasoning that went behind to come to this actual verdict, that this guy's innocent, or this guy is given is released, or this one is given 5 years in jail, or whatever it is, sent to prison for whatever the verdict is. There is the verdict. In the verdict, attached to the verdict, is a semblance, something, kind of a concentration of all the information, but it's only a very little bit. The one who studied the whole case knows the whole richness, knows the whole background, knows everything. That would be like the light of the intelligence. The verdict is just a little bit of the reasoning, a little bit of all that information that is condensed to be the power that pushes the verdict. And he's using this as an idea to explain to us that the light that enters into the emotion. Now we're calling this the emotion because every psak din, every verdict, is either guilty or innocent. Guilty or innocent means you're being judged with a judgment. You have to pay. Your person is locked away. The person is being given a fine, is being punished. That would be severity. So our relationship to so and so is to discipline the person, to judge the person, to punish the person, and so forth. Or the person is vindicated and is innocent. In other words, you extend the kindness and the love or whatever it is, and you set the person free. So the verdict is already an element of an emotion. It's not the story. It's how we will now react to the story. There is what the intelligence, the mind, the facts are the facts of what happened. And that's the reality of it. Now the question is, okay, so as a result, you did so and so. How should we react to, how should society relate to you? You should be locked behind bars because you did something awful. Or we should be kind to you. Maybe you did something wrong, but we can understand that under the considerations, we have to be very, very lenient. Maybe you can get away with a slap on the wrist because of the circumstances which led to such and such behavior, which the judge finds a reason for compassion or a reason for leniency. So what I understand is that every psak din, which means every verdict, is really belongs in the realm of emotion. Now it's backed by the facts, which when the facts were not clear, it took a whole lot of research and took a whole lot of thinking and a whole lack of wisdom and a whole lack of analysis, analytical sifting through things, going through them, coming to an understanding of what really happened. That's intelligence. The intellect, which examines the reality, not how we feel regarding the reality, just what is, versus the emotion, which is our conduct, our reaction towards this person who is now who after we come to the understanding of what happened, how we should relate to that individual. That's an emotional element. Now, what we are saying is that is based on the clarification of the intellect. Some of that intelligence gets down into the emotion. And that would be like the light that is entering the emotion, but it's only entering through a window. Meaning to say, you cannot compare it to the way the jurors or the judge or anybody that sat through those hours and hours of court to their internal knowledge of the facts. The illumination that they have, the light that they have, the clarity that they have is nothing compared to how it ends up in the newspaper. Someone reading the actual verdict. You read the verdict and the newspaper posts the story online, posts the actual final verdict of the judge, and you're reading it from there. Now, if you're a very smart person, if you're a lawyer yourself and you've studied law, and you have a great knowledge of these types of cases, it's very possible that you're going to read this verdict and the few short lines that the judge wrote to support how he or she came to that verdict, and you're going to kind of get a great understanding about what has been going on in that courtroom for the last 2-3 weeks or 2 months. But that's if you're a lawyer yourself and you've been through such procedures, you know what a judge is looking for. So from the verdict and from those short sentences, you can extrapolate the entire saga, the entire drama that went on in the court. All of that you can kind of visualize. But that's only if you're someone who has that knowledge. A person on the street who is only getting the trickle-down version that ends up in the verdict is getting only a tiny bit. What that means is that in the verdict itself lies only a fraction of the light, in this case of the illumination of the truth of what it was or what is in the world of intellect. So that's what he's using to explain this idea that in the emotions, the illumination comes through the window. Let's read inside the bizarre that in the Ze'er Anpin, when it's coming through a window, this would be understood by way of analogy. Psaktin, which means a verdict. Now, I'm giving an example of a court where two people are found, but this can be actually in Torah study. Every subject of Torah. It doesn't have to be legal matters. It can be any matter, kosher or not kosher, pure or not pure, ritually kosher or not kosher, tameh or tahar, right? Impure or pure, innocent or guilty, patur or mutter, exempt or chayev or guilty or having to pay. It can be in all the various different areas. It's in Torah, there's two parts. There is in Talmudic study. You can learn the Mishnah, or you can learn Rambam, for instance, Mishnah Torah, or the Mishnah itself. And what you're learning over there is a set of laws. That's the final verdict. But behind every law of Torah is pages and pages of deep analytical discussion between the great rabbis as they examined what should be the Torah's view in this particular case, based on the few lines and the few words that we have in Scripture that give us the fundamental premise from what to work with, to give us the foundations of God's law. But then when we have to apply it to the millions and millions of different scenarios, over here is where the rabbis debated to understand and appreciate what's the reasoning of God's law, or maybe does the law apply to this case as well? Maybe this case is similar in this way, but not similar in the other way. And the rabbis go back and forth with brilliant, brilliant analysis and discussion. And that's really what is done in the Talmud, and not just in the Talmud, but in the commentators on the Talmud, like Rashi, Tosfos, Rashba, Ritva, Ran, Rosh, Rif, all the what we call Rishonim, Achronim, the early commentators and later commentators, all analyzing and discussing back and forth with the reasonings, so on and so forth. And then everything is distilled after we have all of that information. Everything gets distilled to the final verdict. So what's the verdict? Am I allowed to eat this or not? Is this piece of chicken kosher or not? Is this chicken kosher or not kosher? Based on the way it was slaughtered, based on whatever happened. So the one that's reading the final halacha only gets the verdict, gets the emotion of God, so to speak, that God says this chicken kosher, we can bring it in. It can be part of our a holy existence. Or this chicken is not kosher and it has to be rejected, and therefore we apply judgment to it. We push the chicken away. By the way, I told a story the other night when we did the class on Rabbi Yaakov Yosef of Polna, when we did the Malava Malka, we did the lives of tzaddikim. Told a story that this great saintly tzaddik, Rabbi Yaakov Yosef, was once had found that his mind was being blocked for like 2-3 weeks in prayer. He tried praying and he just couldn't concentrate. And he couldn't reach the spiritual heights that he usually would reach in his mind and his heart when he would pray. And it bothered him so much because he couldn't figure out what the reason for it is. And then his holy master, the holy Baal Shem Tov, revealed to him that one time, it was before Shabbos, I think, and a woman came to him with a question on a chicken, if it's kosher or not kosher. And because he was in a haste, he didn't do his due diligence in looking into the subject. He quickly gave her a superficial answer. And it was easier to say that it's not kosher than say kosher, and he dismissed the Baal Shem Tov said the chicken who had a soul of some spiritual energy, and which wanted to be elevated, but now you told this lady, to throw the chicken in the garbage, and that's what she did. This soul was then not elevated, and this soul is angry at you and upset at you and jamming you and blocking your soul. So. Why am I saying this? Because I'm just bringing out the idea that the verdict, whether something is kosher or not kosher, belongs to the realm of the emotion. Will we be kind to this creature and allow in this situation, or will we be judgmental towards it and send it away based on the halachic criteria information? Okay. But the Mishnah or the Shulchan Aruch only gives you the final verdict. It doesn't give you the pages and pages and pages of background information. If you want to know that, you have to learn the Talmud and go through all of that. By the way, it's one of the most satisfying experiences of Torah study is when you start off and you learn halacha and you trace the halacha back to its original source. It is unbelievable to see how much depth, reasoning, and how much scholarly discussion there is behind every nuance in Judaism. But what he's trying to bring out over here is that when it comes to the verdict itself, has all this information, but in the verdict, you're not going to see it. Sometimes the Rambam or the Mishnah will give you a little bit of something. a little general rule that sets you on the direction of why the rule is that this is kosher or not kosher, why you're allowed to do this on Shabbos, or whether you're prohibited on doing it on Shabbos, and so on and so on. They'll give you just a little bit. And you can't compare it to that which is not stated in the Mishnah, which is stated in the Talmud. So this is the idea that in the emotions, in the psak din, only the light is coming through, but only a little window. Which comes after a whole long discussion when there's a lot of debate and back and forth. When it comes to the psak din, over there, if you're just reading the psak halacha, you're reading just the Rambam, you don't know the whole Talmudic discussion that's behind it. Or as we said before, when a regular judge hands down the verdict, maybe he gives a sentence or two about how he finds the situation, but you don't really know. The other guy, the litigant, is coming out and screaming, the judge misjudged me, he's wrong, he did me wrong. And if you're just, he's gotten your ear, you might come to the conclusion that the judge was unfair and so on and so forth. But you can't judge because you were not in the courtroom. You did not see all the evidence. You did not see the whole story. You're getting the spin. Today's, you have all these spinners, all these newscasters or people that comment on news, and they each one gives their own biases and comes with their own spins. And if this is a person that's kind of on their team, they like to defend this individual. If there's a person on the other side of the aisle, if it's a conservative to a liberal, or a liberal to a conservative, they'll kind of try to spin it that the person was, and the judge is just a corrupt judge. But in most cases, we really don't know anything because we were not in the trial. We weren't in the room. We didn't hear everything that's going on. I'm not saying there aren't any corrupt judges. I'm just saying that most of the times people judging it based on what based on whoever they're listening to, whoever talk show they're listening to, is really not a fair conclusion. But because only a little bit of the reasoning gets into the final verdict, and you know very little. Or he says, but you have to say that really in every psak din, which means when the Mishnah says something is kosher, inside that statement is contained all this deep understanding. It has to be all there, but it's all there concentrated, and it's all there hidden. It's embedded in the final law, because the final law was decided by the sages after they analyzed it from every angle. And they disputed it, and they argued it back and forth until they came to a very, very sharp and deep understanding on the essence of the mitzvah, or on the divine law. And as a result of that, they were able to push away and remove all the misconceptions and get to the root of the matter and to the clarity of it. So that means that all of this is really there in the final halacha. So you have to say, it has all the reasoning and all the explanations. But they're all concealed. They're not recognized in a revealed way. And he gives the example of the Mishnah. Mishnah like the Mishnah, this is a short version. After the rabbis, the great Tanoim, the great sages of the Mishnah, spent hours and hours and hours back and forth discussing. Then the Mishnah came, and gave us the actual, as we said earlier, Torah law. First, the sages of the Mishnah discussed it, and they had many reasons and svaras and explanations of Pilpul Gadol, and they had a great debate. But in the Mishnah, everything is written in a very short and concise way. Now we work our way the opposite, because the way the Torah was given, the way Torah evolved with us, is that the rabbis sat, and the rabbis had all these, the sages of the Mishnah had these amazing, deep analytical discussions, but they didn't write it down. What they wrote down was only the final verdict, and that's what the Mishnah is. Then the later generations, the next about 200 years, the rabbis that followed the Mishnah, they took the text of the Mishnah, and they were like a lawyer. If I was to take a various lawsuit, and then the judge hands down the final verdict, and I don't understand why he gave this verdict. But I bring you to a lawyer who understands law and understands that particular field of law, and he looks at the 3 lines that the judge wrote, and he can then write an entire book of explanation of what the judge's reasoning was in this case, of why he came to this conclusion. And that's what the sages of the Talmud do. They work their way back. When they see the verdict, they begin understanding why is the verdict like this. So they analyzed it and kind of reconstructed all the debates that were done by the rabbis who lived 200 years, 100 to 200 years before them. But what they did is they wrote it down for us. And that's why to us, the Talmud comes as a commentary on the Mishnah. But really, the Mishnah is a distilled version of the Talmud. So it works 2 ways. The Talmud, in other words, the Talmud really preceded the Mishnah, but it was never written down. Then the Mishnah was written down as the final verdict. And then the next generations came and they cracked open each knot, which means each Mishnah. They cracked open each law and examined and explored and debated and found all the internal ins and outs that was leading up to it. And therefore, Mishu Chacham Gadol, and that is the reason why. Now, based on this idea that in the Mishnah itself lies all the great depth of the Talmud, that's why we find that if someone is very wise, from the short. See, most people who learn Mishnah will not understand the pages and pages of Talmud from it. But if you are, if you're a real brilliant Talmudic scholar, and it happens to be that a few pages of Talmud you didn't learn, and then you learn with this one Mishnah that you never learned yet, you can probably figure out half of the Talmud's discussion on it. Talking about a real true genius of a scholar, a great rabbi. Because you know already how the Talmud thinks. You know already what the general principles are. So from the Mishnah, you can extract it. As we said, it's like a great lawyer from the final verdict can extract what must have been going on in that courtroom. So from the short wording of the Mishnah, in these very short words, he knows as kol arichos, the entire length. But in the Mishnah, it's all concentrated and it's hidden. For example, give an example, not from a court, not from a legal debate, but he's giving an argument from a mitzvah. There is a mitzvah of sukkah. Now, the law about a sukkah is that you're supposed to sit in the shade of a sukkah, and for that you have to have these special branches that you have to get shade, and it has to be more shade than sun. Fine. Now, the law is that if the walls are very, very tall, the sukkah is not kosher. A sukkah whose walls are more than 20 cubits, about 30 feet tall, then it's not kosher. And the Talmud says 2 reasons for it. There's different reasons. One reason is that higher than, if the walls are so tall, then the shade is created by the walls. It's not created by the branches on the top. And you have to sit under the shade of the branches. That's where the holiness is, not on the walls. Since the shade over here is created by the walls, so therefore it's not kosher. Up to 20, you're still getting the shade from the roof, not from the walls. But then there's another reason. Because in Sukkot, it's important that you should see the branches on the top, and that's supposed to remind you of the clouds of glory that were surrounding the Jewish people. But something so high, unless you're looking up, unless you throw your head backwards and you look up and you'll see the schach, you'll see the vegetation that's covering. But if you're not looking, you're looking straight, you won't see it if it's higher than 20 cubits. It's too high, the eye doesn't really see it. So these are different reasons. It could be like this, it could be like this, and probably there comes out differences. Now, in the Mishnah, it doesn't say anything. The Mishnah just says higher than 20, it's not kosher. The Talmud already analyzes this and this reason and that reason. It's all there in the Mishnah, but it's there in a short. How did the rabbis come to these explanations? Because they saw in the Mishnah that said that higher than 20, so they had to figure out why. So they came up with these explanations, and these must have been the reasonings of those who wrote the Mishnah. But all of this is showing you that in the emotions, there's only a little tiny bit of light coming through a window compared to the illumination that's in the intellect itself. This is the idea of diminishment of light. Even though it's there, it's not shining in a revealed way. And what is revealed, and what is revealed is only a little bit of light. This is the idea of the emotions. In our case, he's using it all in terms of the evolution of intellect into halacha and into a verdict. So then tomorrow we're going to learn more in regular human emotions, the way we experience things. But today he's explaining it all in the realm of in the world of intelligence itself, in the intelligence of the intelligence, or in the emotion of the intelligence. The verdict is the emotion of the intelligence, and in that, only a little bit of the light of the reasoning of all that illumination of the intellect itself, only a little tiny bit reaches over there. And this is supposed to serve an example how it is above. Ezra will continue in the next class.